Excellent.
And all right, we are recording. So hello and welcome to today's web panel discussion, predictions for the localization industry in 2014 and beyond. Today we have with us, and I have to say, unfortunately, Salvo Giamaresi from PayPal, he couldn't make it, but I'm super excited and thankful for Loy Searle to join us. We have with us Anna Navarro-Schlegel, and Anna, I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Excellent. Good morning and good evening, everybody who's dialing in. So my name is Anna, and I've been in the globalization industry now, I would say, for 20-some years. I used to run a program at Cisco and then at Xerox, then at VMware, and most recently at NetApp. And yeah, so I've run several aspects of globalization, such as I've run international web teams, I've run product teams, content teams, and most recently here at NetApp, I am very fortunate to have a centralized operation where I have different tracks under my team.
Great. Loy, you stepped in for Salvo. I'm going to let you introduce yourself as well.
Sure. Actually, one thing I would like to do is correct the title that was listed under the Net Translations webinar. There's a title there that I never had, but it would have been a great job. It's actually the title that I had at Mincom, I think got transposed in as my Google title. So at Google, I just left Google last week, and at Google I led the global production team, and prior to that I led the global language services. And I've been in the industry also about 20 years, and prior to that I led localizations and some other functions for Mincom, and I also led the localization organization at J.D. Edwards. So that's kind of my history in the industry space. A fair bit of experience with, I'd say, the centralized client-side business.
Great, excellent, thanks. Gal, you're the CEO at NetTranslators. Why don't you briefly introduce yourself as well?
Yes, I'm with NetTranslators in the last 10 years. Before that, I was in the IT industry in Israel, and that's it for now.
Great. And then Anna, just that we have a lot of women in the audience today. You're also the chairwoman of Women in Localization. Did you want to quickly say 2 words about this organization?
That's right. How could I have forgotten? So yeah, yes, exactly. Thanks for prompting that. So yeah, so I'm one of the 3 co-founders of Women in Localization along Eva and Sylvia. And I've been the chairwoman for the past, I think, couple of years. And yeah, so Women in Localization is today, I believe, a little over 1,200 members reach, and we're actually going global, and we're opening chapters in Europe. We're opening a new chapter in Seattle, one on the East Coast in the United States. So if anybody is interested in learning more about it, just feel free to reach out on LinkedIn.
Great,
but Women in Localization is a great association where we're trying to help each other out with jobs, and who knows about transcreation, or who knows about these sort of QA testing methodology. So it's a great place to brainstorm.
Excellent, thank you very much. This said, why don't we let's do a quick poll so we know a little bit more about the audience. Are you on the customer side, the vendor side? Are you a freelance linguist, a consultant in the L10N, I18N space, or something else? Maybe we'll leave it open for another 15, 20 seconds or so. But I'm already seeing a trend here. I'll be sharing the results in a second, and then we're going to get started with the first question. And actually, I'll leave the poll open for another 10 seconds. Anna and Loy, I'm going to ask you the first question while we still keep the poll open. Actually, no, let's do this. I'm going to close the poll right now. So give us your vote. 1, 2, 3. So that poll has been closed. I'm going to share the results here. We have 29% on the customer side, 35% on the vendor side, 7% freelance linguists, 13% consultants, and 16% others. All right, let's go to the next slide here. We have 3 topics today. Tomorrow's global enterprise. Topic 2, focus on client-vendor partnerships. Topic 3, leveraging new technologies in the global enterprise. All right, let's get started with tomorrow's global enterprise. And Anna and Loy, I have a question for you. Most large companies today are striving to achieve global enterprise status. Both of you have or are working for global enterprises. What's the recipe? And Loy, I'm going to add, we recently met at Loc-World last month where you presented, how does Google do it? So why don't we get started with this question? And I'm actually, Loy, why don't you start?
Okay, sure. You know, the companies that I've worked for, I started out with a couple companies that just went global as I was with them. And of course, Google was well on the path when I started. Maybe I'll start with a little bit with Google. You know, Google invests heavily in the markets. And I think that you can't go global without having some kind of an investment on the ground in the countries that you intend to make a difference in. So I think that if there's a single key, it's recognizing that it can't be done without an investment and ultimately having some kind of representation and players on the ground running, you know, being aware of what the local market requires and what's necessary in the local market. And Google was a very fortunate place to work in that they really heavily invested in that area. So I would say if I were to summarize what we talked about in the presentation, the key things that Google has done is continued a global expansion, and that was a focus area for them with almost kind of a systematic pace. You know, they would kind of conquer one set of languages and move into those markets. Within a year or two after the localizations were done, you would really see a strong foothold in the market, and that's a global strategy that they had. In terms of the localization organization support for that, really the way that most localization organizations support that offering is by getting the work done quickly, getting it done on time, meeting the demands of producing whatever the product is at the time that it's needed and doing quality work. So a big part of, I think, our focus is always on quality and getting it done on time. And that's, if I were to summarize the whole presentation, I would say that's how we did it, was doing good work on time.
Well, okay, great. Anna?
So that's such a broad question, you know, how to achieve global enterprise status. Many companies, in my experience, from especially talking to a lot of people through the Women in Localization, so many companies want to go international. They know that the U.S. market at some point is going to saturate, and they want and need to go international if they want to expand and grow and keep investing in innovation, etc. What's very difficult for companies is to learn how to go global in a way that actually have a really good impact once they are international. Because it's very different for a company to put a couple salespeople in an office in Poland versus, you know, supporting those people with websites and globalized product and channel material and whatever it is that they need to do. So I think for companies to achieve global enterprise status, they really need to understand what is the minimum that they need to do to be able to stay in that market. And it's not just about translations, it's not just about, you know, having a salesperson there, but it's a full end-to-end program of a minimum amount of requisites that that they need to have. And so I see a lot of companies struggling with that, of that in between being international and being global.
Okay. Actually, I do have a question. Like, at your respective companies or former companies, how high did localization rank? Were you like in the top meetings, or where would you say does localization rank in terms of, expansion of the company, etc.?
So when I was at VMware, I can tell you that it was top. Cisco was top. Xerox is top. Where I am right now, it's interesting. It's pretty high up there, and I can meet with the CEO whenever I want to or have to, which is, I'm very, very lucky, because I realize that not every, director of globalization or localization has that privilege. But it's less of a deal here because of the nature of the product. And so you always need to understand first, what is it that the company is trying to achieve? Is it, for the mass market, or is it for a very specialized group of people in the industry? Then localization is not going to be so up front and center, other than maybe innovation or technology or hardware.
Okay, great. Loy, I'm going to ask you the same question, and I'll start actually a second poll while you answer the question. We'd like to know, how long has your company been doing localization? All right, Loy, I mean, Google, one of the most globally recognized companies in the world, where does localization fit in?
It's an interesting question, because at Google, I would say localization is just one of many large groups within the company. So I don't see at Google like localization having the CEO's attention, unless we were to, unless they failed in some manner, which they've not done in a long time. At other companies that I've worked in, so certainly at J.D. Edwards and at Mincom, I had CEO level conversations, EVP reporting structures, and much higher visibility. I think sometimes it has to do also with where the company is in the globalization process. When a company is just starting to go global and just beginning to venture into that space, it's a really important big deal for the company. And so there's a lot more touch and visibility, and I think it's a more strategic role in those circumstances within a company. Once the machine is going and it's a well-oiled, functioning thing, it becomes more just part of the business operations, and may not typically hold that stature over time. At least that's been kind of my experience, and I think if you look at Google, where it's a well-established machine, you can see that it doesn't have the same high visibility in terms of like the org structure as some of the other companies that I've worked for that were really just starting to go down that path, or were early on in their journey.
Great.
Yeah,
Great.
I would completely agree with what Loy is saying. She nailed it, because some companies are not paying attention to localization, and they should, and some, are more established, thank God, right? And then you just need to preserve the program dollars and the investment fairly untouched, so that you can keep doing the amazing things that your teams want to achieve.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I have the results of the poll for you guys. So we have 54% of our audience today have done localization 10 years or more, 13% between 5 and 9 years, 26% 1 to 4 years, and only 4% not at all. So we have a very experienced audience with us today. This said, I'm going to ask you guys another very broad question. Maybe in order to stay on track here time-wise, try to answer it as compact as possible. Can you tell us a bit more on how you handle centralization or decentralization, automation, integration, etc., in the past and now at your respective companies? That's a very broad question. Loy, I'm going to ask you to answer first.
Sure. Sure. You know, most of my experience has actually been in one flavor or another of a centralized localization organization. At Google, while the team is globally dispersed, it was a centralized team. At Mincom and in JD Edwards, it was also a centralized team. Probably the biggest difference between, like if I look at JD Edwards versus Google, we actually had all of our linguists, our translators, on site in one location in Denver, Colorado. It was a big group of about 85 people, and we only outsourced about 20–30% of the work that was peak. So we basically staffed to the core work that we could predictably expect in the system at all times. And compared to Google, which that linguistic function, everything is outsourced, but the linguistic resources that assess the quality and oversee that are spread geographically around the world, and the production team in just a few hubs. So my experience on the centralization side is what's lovely about it is when it's centralized, you can really own your own processes. You can get your arms around the tools. There's no internal debate over this tool or this vendor or that vendor. It's very easy to make the operation tight. And it's also, I think, much easier to control the costs and the budget because you can leverage across gaps in work in one area with resourcing support from another area. So I think that's really the strength of the centralized model. I think there are challenges with the centralized model, which are never feeling like there are enough resources. I think centralized models always are hungry, but I think that's kind of the nature of the beast. If I were to look at the automation integration pieces, that's been, I've seen this done different ways, but in pretty much every place I've ever worked, there are some homegrown tools. You have to do some things on your own to integrate with the processes and the technology of the business. And there's usually typically a place for some off-the-shelf tools as well. So done everything from create pretty much most of the tools that we've used, and Google is definitely kind of a make-your-own tool place, to buying everything off the shelf and just integrating it, which was much more the Mincom strategy, to a bit of a blend where, at JD Edwards, where we built our own tools, but we integrated industry tools within those tools.
Great, thank you very much. Anna?
So I've seen both. I've seen decentralized and I've seen centralized. At this point, I can say that for me, in my experience, centralization works better. You can leverage the team if there is a big initiative in the company, you can pool resources and react much faster. And then obviously automation becomes key. Without automation, you don't grow. So for those on the poll that we're on the 50% that are less than 10 years in localization, an advice would be put a good infrastructure first around integration and automation of anything that's enterprise-wide around the company, be information engineering or your web teams or your partner portals, your knowledge bases. You do want a good map, a good architectural map of how you're going to flow content really quickly to be able to react to the market as fast as you can. And I think that if you're centralized, you gather requirements faster, you synergize much better, and that's what I've been striving for. In fact, I don't work for companies anymore that don't believe in centralization or my approach.
Great, great. All right, actually, why don't we move on to topic 2, since we're already a little bit behind schedule. Focus on client-vendor partnership. And actually, Gal, I think I'm going to ask you a question here. On the subject of communications, how does NetTranslators work with your clients to develop bulletproof communication protocols between your clients' teams and your team? In other words, as we're seeing shifts in the way project managers leverage new tools and are required to handle a growing volume of content, how do you work with your clients to adapt to each other's internal processes and still keep the focus on top quality? That's a long question.
Yes, it is. Well, communication is one of the most important parts for a successful project, as well as long-term relationship between client and vendor. Each client needs different approach for communication. And that means that we really need to understand the client needs. For example, there are clients of different scale, from lone wolf technical writer with translation to enterprise with large localization department, and everything between. And often the lone wolf is interested in drag and drop approach, really does not want to be bothered with too much information. So in a case such as this, we tailor communication channel which reflect these needs, and may include the status update from the project manager and delivery notification. Another scenario is one of which there is a small localization or translation department with a large volume of work, and we need to coordinate and communicate project issues and information in a seamless manner without disrupting the normal course of business. Here we might use email aliases, which would enable more visibility to the entire team on both sides, and facilitate problem solving in a more efficient manner.
Great.
Another way is to communicate directly with the clients via issue tracking tools, and those could be ours or theirs. I think the most important trend that we are seeing is coming from the client who needs to get their product to local market more quickly, and for that we are looking to the technology. We are required to manage this in a much more robust manner. Each client, irrespective of technology or tools they choose, still required of us to tailor communication channel that maintains the basic of good communication, such as clear and concise instruction, transparency, escalation channel, and so on.
Great. Great. All right. Thank you, Gal. Why don't I ask, I'm going to start with Anna. Solid and long-term partnerships between clients and localization vendors create opportunities and profits for both sides. How do you select your vendors? Are there review processes, etc.? How do you pick your vendors? How do you make it a success story?
So I pick my vendors and make it a success story when they become my partners and I become their partner. So I try to make it a win-win. Obviously, there's still that client, customer, and vendor relationship, but I see the vendor as an extension of my team. And so the way I pick the vendors is on a huge, we obviously look for the basics, right? To me, those are the basics. There's a lot of vendors out there today that offer amazing quality. They nail the schedules, and they can turn around millions of words consistently and doing pretty well. But in the past couple of years, I've been very focused on partnering with them on what's the next thing we can work on, what's something cool we can work on around QA or around automation and workflows, and how can we push the limit. That's something that's very, very interesting to me.
Great.
And here at NetApp, we do have all kinds of vendors. We have translation vendors, we have testing vendors, we have reviewer vendors, we have Aclaro is our vendor just for review, as an example, or we have vendors that are just for trans creation. We have vendors that are just for strategy. We even have a vendor for communications. So depending on what vendor, then we partner around different areas that will help my team be very, very successful.
Absolutely. Actually, you know what? I'm going to launch the next poll, which relates to your answer, and I'm going to ask Loy to answer this question as well.
Okay. You know, I totally agree with what Anna said about partnership. I actually think that that is really key. I think sometimes it gets forgotten on the client side of the business in a largely outsourced field that the vendors are doing most of the work. So it must be a partnership, and the communication lines must be open for it to work effectively. I think the experiences that I've had that have been most frustrating have been when there isn't transparency in communication with the vendor channel. I think the only way to ever get a really successful, well-run partnership going is when there's very open, clear communication channels. You have to be able to tell the truth on both sides of the table and listen to it and take it on and address the issues. I think in terms of selection of vendors, I think it's pretty typical, the RFP process. I think most of us have gone through that experience. Maybe there's one piece that I would add, which is not all vendors, not all sizes fit all customers. I think it's really important for the client side to look at the size of their business, the nature of their business, and find a partner that's appropriate, or a partner or two that's appropriate. So if I was a small company with just a little bit of translations, I probably wouldn't go after the biggest, you know, translation vendor. I might go for a smaller vendor that would value my business and hold my hand and educate me through the process. Whereas if I'm a big enterprise, scale and the ability to handle volumes or peaks and valleys are much more of an issue. Or things like their technical expertise and ability to connect with the tools and adapt quickly when there are changes in process or automation. So I think those are kind of factors in the selection process with vendors. The larger the enterprise, I think the more that vendor relationship becomes a complex relationship with tools and processes, and the switching vendors is not something that anybody wants to do. As the larger you get, the harder that process becomes. So nurturing the relationship really matters, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Let me quick share the results of the poll. How many vendors do you work with? So we had 70% work with one vendor, 20% with 2 or 3, 20% with 4 to 5, 29% with more than 5. So this tells me we have a lot of like enterprise audience people here today. 15% are not sure. One more question on topic 2. We all talk about reducing turnaround times, automating processes, reducing costs. What role does quality play here? How do we keep quality and at the same time achieve all these other goals? Will this change the definition of quality, or will the clients work with different levels of quality? What have you guys seen? Anna, I'm going to ask you first.
On quality?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is such a topic right now. So when I started here at NetApp, because there was no localization team before, quality was very, very key. We hired an agency. We in fact have people in a few dozen countries. Some teams are bigger, some teams are smaller. And we were reviewing every single word that was coming back from the vendor. Today, the model is very, very different, and we had to grow up very fast because we went from translating a few million words a year to a huge number of millions of words a year. So while the program dollars did not grow for the review team, we had to get really smart as to, okay, we want to get out of the business of reviewing every single word. And so the linguist, we call them the localization linguistic PMs, they've had to come up with a new model of spot checking and going deep in areas, for example, that are very visible for marketing, but for example, more technical areas of product manuals, we're into spot checking or doing less percentage of reviews. So we've seen a big transition into how we used to do this. And yes, we have in-house reviewers. They're mainly, some are headcount and some are through an agency, but we do review because each our internal clients, our marketing, our channel, 99% of our business goes through the channel. So channel partners do need everything spotless and impeccable because we are competing very fiercely with several other companies in the space that are really professional and very good as to how they present themselves globally. So QA becomes really, really important for us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Loy?
I would concur with Anna's comments about the business needs changing. Like even at different places I've worked, at Google, a good example was we reviewed everything initially. And then we got to a very similar, I'd say a very similar place where as you can see that the system is working and is producing quality, you address everything that you can upstream. So are you, do you have good style guides? Do you define your terminology? Do you have quality processes that are more likely to result in producing higher quality as an initial outcome? Or does your process require more fixing? So addressing everything that you can up front, I think, is really critical. And then watching and monitoring basically your fail rates or your pass rates over time to see that you've got a controlled and trained system that's just getting tighter and tighter. And this is vendor communication. This might be training translators. This is providing the right kind of information, all of that up front so that the quality outcome downstream is better. And I think it's also important that the quality feedback doesn't just include what's wrong. This is an error, this is a problem, but also what's right. I think we tend to underestimate the value of kudos, of, hey, this was a beautiful job, excellent job, show this to the next guy who's doing this work so that maybe they'll up their game. So I think both sides of feedback are really important in order to get quality out of the process. And once you're getting that through the system, then I think you can drop back to audit models. Maybe, initially you're reviewing more of the content and then over time you can reduce it to less and less. I say that with some caution in that I firmly believe that some content should probably always be reviewed. Marketing content that may require some level of optimization, that kind of content, I would be skeptical to let that slide. But help center content, things like that probably are good candidates for just an audit process. And I also think that there are different levels of quality that are appropriate. Certainly if you've got customer written content that you're dealing with, nobody expects the customer to write perfectly. So the quality expectations on blog content or customer submitted content is not going to be the same as, say, marketing content. So I think it's reasonable to tier quality expectations across the content levels and to have processes that have higher and lesser amounts of review to audit depending upon the content types.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And we're already running a little bit behind schedule, and we're getting so many questions, so I need to apologize in advance. We'll not get to every question, but we'll try to leave about 7 to 10 minutes to answer questions from the live audience. This said, why don't we venture into topic 3? And let's open this topic with another quick poll here. I'll probably leave it open for 20-30 seconds. Do you expect machine translation to be part of the core product localization process? within the next 2 years? If you can let us know. Anna, why don't you tell us a little bit more about machine translation, your experience in your work life?
Okay, so in my team right now, we are using machine translation for knowledge-based articles, and this is the first we have done here. So we are using SDLV Global, and we have trained a handful of languages, I believe no more than 5 or 6. And so we're testing to see what our users are saying. I think it's going well. Is it going to be at the core product of localization process within the next 2 years? I believe so. Again, you know, because we're a centralized team and we do banners for, you know, airports and much more delicate type of content, we are going to have to identify what areas are good for machine translation and what areas are not. And I do have to say machine translation is really good for certain content types, and it's not there for other content types. And so, but however, I am pushing my team really, really hard to find more places to embed it. And interestingly enough, there are countries like Japan that are obviously extremely worried about quality, right, that are embracing machine translation. So I am very, very pleased to see that even some of our partners are saying it would be okay if some of these documents would be machine translated if you've trained the engines first with your TMs and a proper infrastructure of all these beautiful content that my team is reviewing. So the fact that we have professional reviewers, I think it's going to be very beneficial to our MT strategy because they'll be able to push content that's impeccable to train the engine.
Absolutely. And Lloyd, before I let you answer this question, let me quick share the results of this poll. 42 said yes, 37 yes, but not within 2 years, 15% no, 6% no sure. Machine translation at Google or your previous jobs, can you tell us a little bit more?
Sure. So at Google, MT was integrated within the translation process. So every it was considered as part of our suggestion process and clearly flagged as MT, so the translator would know if they're looking at an MT suggestion versus a previous translation. That's a nice, tidy way to do it that at least gives the translator the choice. Google was looking at other ways to use it, and I imagine that, you know, I would leave that to them to figure out what they're going to do next. It's not for me to say. But I do think there's an interesting, there would be a different way of looking at MT that I don't think our industry does much. And that is we have a tendency to try to apply MT to our existing content and then try to convince or engage our stakeholders in being willing to accept it, or even ourselves. And I think that there's a different approach that we should look at for MT, and that is almost all of our businesses have content that we're unwilling to invest in translating in some markets or in all of our markets, perhaps. There is always some level of content that we say, no, it's not worth spending the money on that. And I actually think that in many of our organizations, if we approached the MT question with the content that nobody intends to spend money on anyway, and offer that as the test ground for it, and then come from the back end. Come from, hey, this is working pretty good for the content that we wouldn't really expect to invest in. Let's move upstream. What else can we do from here? It's a much easier win. I think it's a much easier convincing job of our stakeholders, and it gives us a proving ground within our own industry space to give us confidence before we reach into the content that really holds our reputation within our companies. I think that would be a great opportunity place for us to explore more.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let me, next question. Companies like CloudWords, WordBee, and SmartLink are arising to offer cloud-based translation management workflow. Do the panelists think that this kind of translation marketplace will prevail? When a localization program is in place on the client side, do these systems help or hurt? Interesting question. Loy, I'm going to let you answer first.
So first of all, I'm all for the cloud. There are interesting challenges, I think, with some of these solutions if you look in the long-tail markets, though. And we certainly, Google had some challenges early days with just having kind of a cloud solution. Because you get a rainstorm someplace in Africa and suddenly your translator can't be online. And so I think even the cloud-based solutions have to have some way of dealing with the fact that the infrastructure isn't there all around the world for all of the languages that might need to be produced. Certainly in India and parts of Africa where the infrastructure is not there, I think it's a challenge. So I think that we're going more that direction with that kind of real-time cloud solution. Industry's not wanting to have the big footprint. But, boy, I think that we're a long ways away from having certain internet connectivity and certain infrastructure that we can rely on globally yet. So I think there is a bridge that must be forged between these across the world before that's a certain thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anna, I'm going to let you answer this question as well.
Well, I'm from NetApp, so if I don't believe in the cloud, then so I would just say to any vendor out there that's listening, come and talk to us. NetApp can offer a solution. And I completely agree with what Loy was saying. It's I think the vision and the idea is great. Would I put it all on the cloud just yet? No. We are talking to SmartLink, and we do talk to CloudWords, and the parts that I really enjoy in when we meet with these companies is to see where they're going, and sometimes they make us, part of their requirements offerings, and we have really good conversations that I think shape how they're positioning their products. I like the dashboard part of these solutions. I really enjoy that because I think everybody can see where projects are, where status of projects and volumes, and you can slice and dice the data in so many different ways. So that's very, very appealing to me.
Absolutely. Actually, Gal, I have a question for you. Talking about proprietary systems, when do you agree to use a client's proprietary system? Do you first test them out to be sure they can integrate well with your internal quality processes? What's your take on that, Gal?
Sure, that is definite. We absolutely believe that the value we bring to our client rests upon quality of our offering. To this end, we really must ensure that those quality processes do not suffer as a result of our adopting a different tool. And we are encouraging pilot projects to not only ensure this and approve our capabilities, but more significantly to see where we can perhaps make improvement upon the system or the process.
Okay, absolutely. Actually, question, Loy and Anna, I assume you guys have proprietary systems or worked with proprietary systems. Is that assumption correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Can I ask for what kind of processes would you use proprietary systems?
I think this depends on the company's philosophy about purchasing products and integrating them versus building your own. Google was pretty allergic to having a lot of external tools. So Google was a build-it-your-own culture. But many companies will look at localizations and they will make a decision to just build the tools that they consider to be core or strategic. So it's not an uncommon practice to have, I think, the internationalization framework be something that is proprietary and owned by a company, but to have integrated within that industry translation tools, because not every company wants to reinvent the wheel of industry translation tools. Unless that's your core business, you may not want to go down that path. So I think it has a lot to do with the nature of the business.
Yeah, I would agree with Loy. And in fact, we have purchased everything here at NetApp. But I have been in companies where we had so much fun, creating our own dashboards and creating our own connectors and translation management systems, even at Xerox, I recall that. But I agree with Loy. It depends on the company, the philosophy, the program dollars, how many people you have in the team that can support that, etc.
Okay, great. Here we go with another interesting question. Curious if the panel sees video replacing most of the written help and support materials. Do you have any plans to deal with this? And actually a second question on this topic. The application I localize is a software enterprise solution. We localize the UI, of course, user interface, and I want to stop localizing the million-plus words of online help and start localizing something more end-user specific, such as roles-based doc training pieces that are short, to the point, and easy to edit. Are you seeing any trends in this direction? Summary, will video replace a huge amount of docs when it comes to localization? And how do you deal with online help? Maybe Anna, if you want to go first.
Sure. So we are seeing that video is becoming very, very prominent. And you probably see a ton of LSPs coming up with, quick solutions and rapid solutions for video localization. So we have seen a huge increase video as well. And on the online help, oh my God, yes, we are seeing as well some of that where we're trying to come up with creative quick reference guides on the product and that are much more customer friendly instead of these massive traditional page after page of hundreds of pages of online help.
Yeah.
So whoever asked the question is probably having the same experience that I'm having right now, which is how do you simplify, keep the user interested? Because when you look at the amount of information that's out there, it's too much, right? So how do you keep inventing and keeping things interesting and fresh is what heads of localization or even writers in the company or any marketeer should be constantly thinking about that, because we're competing with so many companies and so much more documentation out there. So I think video is a good way of doing that. Quick reference guides, and titles. Titles are so important of all this documentation. How do you bring the user to finding exactly what it is that they need and that's going to spark their interest is very important as well.
Yeah, actually an interesting thought, I think, on this topic. Now when I need to find a specific answer to like a software issue or something, I turn to Google, to YouTube, and I check, hey, somebody, I'm sure, has put up a video that will answer my question. Loy, what are your thoughts? How does Google deal with this?
I think you just nailed it. I actually think that we're seeing more and more, and people will post information when they know how to do something. So more and more, the level of information that companies might need to provide that is help content or that is user content in some manner, it may not need to be as deep and rich as it has traditionally in the past, because YouTube will take that place. Customers, expert customers will oftentimes take that place where they will offer up their suggestions, and it's an interesting thing that there is more and more of that niche of content. And that niche of content you could apply MT to, because nobody expects the customer to have written glorious content. So I think we'll see more and more video taking the place, and I think it's not just the video in English, but video also in the respective languages. Somebody will figure out how to do that in Greek, you know, and so your Greek site might have its own content that's customer specific, that's customer influenced. So I definitely see that as a trend as well. I think there's what's the famous quote? If I'd had more time, it would have been shorter. I think that there is a real place for roles-based single sourcing of content, for reducing the content footprint and figuring out what's really, really important. I think one of the greatest challenges in our industry on the content side as well as on the language side is we love the word and we want to make more of them. And sometimes the real art is in saying less or just doing what's essential and what's important, and you can translate a whole lot more of what's important than creating a very different experience for your English audience versus the global audience. So I think there's a lot to be said for shrinking the content footprint, figuring out what's really important globally, and whenever the localization organization is a sister or under the same umbrella as the content organization, a lot is possible. I think that kind of relationship that puts some accountability on the cost of translation on the content organization is powerful.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, so I think now we're going to jump into taking questions from the audience. We have about 8 minutes left, and I know, Anna, you need to leave right on time. We only scratch the surface. We have so many questions, and maybe we can do a follow-up session at some point. But let's start. A question from Richard. You mentioned using lots of different vendors for different types of translation. How do you manage terminology and TM, translation memory sharing, among those vendors to ensure consistency across different communication channels? Anna, I'm going to let you tackle that question.
Yeah. So we use the many vendors, but for translation, we have 4 different vendors. So if I'll give you an example, one of these vendors just for all our legal content and finance and procurement stuff. So for that, we have a vendor who specializes just for legal, and the TM is really just for that. For the rest, number one, we have a lead primary reviewer in each country. And these guys are the owners of that language. So their job is to train these agencies on style guides and glossaries, and whatever goes on to their multi-terms on SDL multi-term is decided by these lead primary reviewer in the country. So the goal of having these folks in the country is to really train and speak constantly with these translation vendors so that they're going to deliver amazing quality. And how do we manage all these vendors? Is we have a pretty repeatable process with quarterly business reviews, with very clear directions, style guides, glossaries, and a good default TM infrastructure is also very necessary.
Absolutely. Loy, if you want to give it like a super short answer, we're approaching the end of the session. I still have a few questions that I want to give to you guys. Loy, what's your quick take?
You know, I have to say I think Anna nailed it, and that pretty much aligns with strategies that I've used in other companies as well. You know, having somebody who owns the language matters, and sharing the terminology and deciding how you're divvying up the work between your vendors so you don't create unnecessary, collisions is a good thing.
Great.
Yeah, I agree.
Perfect. Loy, I'm going to ask you the next question. A question from Michelle. Do you guys use crowdsourcing for localization? If so, with what level of success and for what type of content?
Okay. So I think Google played with this in the early days of like crowdsourcing, as in, it's free and people are volunteering. And I don't think that anymore that's much of a common approach, because most of us don't expect somebody to work for free. Now, I would separate that out from a community model because I do think there can be a real use for a paid community model for some types of content or some types of work. And that's certainly one of the mechanisms that Google employs as well as their standard vendors. And it's more of a community. I would call it a gated community, you know, a managed and gated community. So crowdsourcing, not so much, except perhaps if you have passion languages where some crowd, I would say, where there is some element of this that exists at Google is for what I would consider to be the passion languages, the languages that most companies are not going to translate into because they don't expect to make a lot of money in maybe Cherokee or Navajo or some of the very, very, very obscure languages. But there may be people who want to keep those languages alive, who want to volunteer and do translations for those languages. And companies that make their product accessible like Google so that that kind of work can happen, it's a great way to build goodwill and help keep a language alive that maybe wouldn't be kept alive otherwise. But it's not a great path to creating a very predictable, usable product in those languages, because what tends to happen is there's a lot of enthusiasm to do the first release, and then over time the enthusiasm wanes to keep it maintained. So if it's somebody's part-time occasional job to do it, it's very hard to actually deliver a product that way.
Great, thank you. Anna, if you can just provide us with a quick answer, I want to ask you one more question before you have to head out.
Sure.
Has NetApp working, or is NetApp doing crowdsourcing for localization?
No, not at the moment. We're not. But my team knows that that's coming, and we're looking for areas potentially through the communities first to start understanding who is our crowd. So we do need to connect with our internal community team.
Great.
Actually, you know, I would add one more thing to that is sometimes there is a place for that in the review or in the quality assessment, collecting feedback from customer base and things like that. That can be a really nice use of the crowd.
Yeah, if you have the time, right?
Mm-hmm. Or if it's post, if you're not holding anything up.
That's true. That's true. If it's post, that would be a really good timing. Yep. Yep.
Great. All right. Let me ask you, it's probably the last question before we conclude here. In localizing a website, for example, do you research approved keywords prior to translation? That's international search engine optimization. Can you speak more on this process? And actually, I own a search engine optimization company, and I see huge demand for international search engine optimization. Maybe Anna, I'm going to let you answer first. Are you actually doing keyword research for international SEO?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have to.
Yep.
So it's not just a process of translating, but you do need to adapt, and you need to move the customer to where you want to take them. So otherwise you wouldn't be able to do that. Yeah.
Great. Loy, from the search engine. How?
Yeah, you know, it's one of those things that's organized a little bit differently at Google. So the localization bit of that is something that we've always done, but most of the optimization is actually handled by another part of the organization. So we do a portion of it, and a portion of it was done by another part of the organization.
Great. All right, and actually, I think we have 1 minute left. Anna, I know you need to go. Do you have a few last words for us before you head out?
You know, I would be glad to sit again with Loy and the panel and continue questions, because I know that people are always eager to know, like, what are you guys doing? What's coming next? So I'm totally available if you want to continue the conversation.
Great. Yeah, I would love to do a part two.
Happy to as well.
Excellent. Loy, any last thoughts, recommendations, tips for our audience today? We had over 250 people signed up.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, no, nothing more on my end, but happy to do a follow-on if people want it.
Great. Thank you very much. Gal, any last thoughts on this topic?
No, just to say that it looked that the future of localization has never been brighter. So I'm happy to be here.
Great. All right. We are doing these web panels about every 2-3 months. They're great. I think we provide a lot of good value information to our audience. So check back in next time. Thank you very much, NetTranslators, for being the host. I enjoyed moderating the session. It was a blast, and I always enjoy talking with industry thought leaders such as Anna and Loy and Gal. Learn about the next event by connecting with NetTranslators on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook, of course. This said, Anna and Loy and Gal, I would like to thank you for sharing your knowledge. I had a blast, and let's do this sometime soon again.
Excellent.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much.
Excellent.
Great. Thanks a lot. Bye, guys. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.